Hello Year 4s and welcome back. In our third lesson, we are going to be using the ideas that you wrote down yesterday for your innovation, and we are going to be turning them into a story today. Remember, we needed to keep the same moral of don't let your pride get in the way of telling the truth, but we brainstormed some ideas of what we could change our characters to, what we could change our setting to, and what we could change the idea of the story and how the truth came out. We could change that. So go and get your ideas that you jotted down yesterday, have them next to you, and then I will be modeling how we can turn that into a new story about someone who let their pride get in the way of things and get in the way of telling the truth. I've decided, using my ideas that I brainstormed yesterday, my story is going to be about a prideful king who loved shoes. So the story is going to be called I'm going to call it the Prideful King's New Shoes. So the Prideful King's New Shoes. Next, if we remember our story of the Emperor's new clothes, we know that the trickster character comes in and presents themselves to the Emperor and says, we can make you the finest clothes in the world. So I'm going to have a similar idea, and I'm going to say, one day, because that's obviously how we can start our our folk tale. So one day, and then I've got to give it a comma, and then I'm going to say, obviously there'd be a shoemaker that makes it. So I'm going to say one day, a sneaky, because that's what I'm going to call him, a sneaky shoemaker came to a kingdom that was ruled over by a prideful king. Okay, so I've got my heading and I have my first paragraph. It says, one day a sneaky shoemaker came to a kingdom that was ruled over by a prideful king. Still carrying on with the story, obviously with our beginning, the sneaky shoemaker said to the king, comma, and then I'm going to open up my speech box. I can make you the fanciest shoes ever seen. So he says, I can make you the fanciest shoes ever seen. So now, if we know our story, we know that the king quite liked this idea, didn't he? He wanted to be better than everybody else. So he says, I can make you the fanciest shoes ever seen. The king, obviously being full of pride, likes this idea. So he agrees with that. So the king liked this idea. And he's obviously got to promise anything that the shoemaker wants or needs just to be given. He will pay whatever is needed for this. Okay? So the king liked this idea and offered the shoemaker anything. So he offered the shoemaker anything he wanted. So I've said, the king liked this idea and offered the shoemaker anything he wanted for these shoes. I'm also going to write that the shoemaker made sure to tell the king that only those worthy of seeing these shoes, only the best people in the land could see these shoes, as they were the finest shoes ever to be seen. Now you can see that this is the beginning of my story. Much like our story about the emperor and his new clothes, this is the start of my story from my innovation that we looked at yesterday. And I've used the king, I've used that he's going to be getting new shoes. And I've used my trickster is a sneaky shoemaker. And I've called him a sneaky shoemaker because he's not being very truthful. Okay. My story will obviously go on to the middle where people come in and see the shoes and they have to pretend that they see them because nobody wants to be truthful to the king and say, actually, the sneaky shoemaker's lying. He hasn't been able to make them. He's not making them. He's not making anything. And that will obviously carry on. So what my task to you today is the following. Using your innovation ideas yesterday, write up your version of the emperor's new clothes, using obviously the characters that you thought of, the trickster character that you thought of, but we're still going with the same moral of don't let your pride get in the way of telling the truth. Make sure that you are laying out your work neatly. So this is the beginning of my paragraph. You can see I've started with a fronted adverbial of one day. It has a comma in it. You can see that I've punctuated my speech marks correctly, although you can't see it, but there's a comma there. And then I have my speech marks, and then I have my speech marks here as well, making sure it's a full sentence. I've got my capital letter. And you can see that I have my full stops, and I've also used my joined handwriting. So what I would like you to do is write out your version and then share it with us on Tapestry. Make sure that you are punctuating it correctly. Make sure you are using paragraphs. This would have been my first paragraph, and then I would have moved on to my middle, which would have been my second paragraph, and then obviously the end bit as well. So you're using paragraphs, you're using your characters that we've discussed, and from the toolkit you've made, it should be things like flat characters. So you've got a king, he's still prideful. You've got the weaver in the in the Emperor's story, and that obviously is the trickster character. And then you should have an honest character in your story that tells the truth. Make sure you've got that. Make sure that you've got some kind of a setting, even though it's not a time period. It could just be a kingdom. It doesn't mean I know when this was set. It just says a kingdom. You can use some descriptive words. So I've used alliteration. I've got sneaky shoemaker. You can use, we looked at using the power of 3, so repetition through your story. Go back, have a look at your toolkit, and make sure you are using all of that in your story.